So you have 8 characteristics of romanticism and the works that correlate with their theme: love of the power of nature, desire for personal freedom, criticism of society, seeing nature as a retreat, feeling isolated from society, emphasis on memory and feeling, glorifying the past, poetry or prose written in a conversational, informal style. For any one of these, and you pick just one, then you pick 2 works of literature to discuss as they relate to one of these characteristics of romanticism. And I have the works down here at the bottom. And so you see them. Lines composed to few miles above Tintern Abbey, Ode to a Nightingale, Ode to the West Wind, Apostrophe to the Ocean, The World is Too Much With Us, London 1802. Those are our poems. And then our prose selections from Frankenstein, from Mrs. Dalloway, and the Madeleine from Proust. You notice those have letters in front of them. So up here at the top, I have given you 3 choices for each topic. You're only doing 2. So, for example, if you decide to write about love of the power of nature, you can pick either work A, C, or D. So that's either Tintern Abbey, or West Wind, or Apostrophe to the Ocean. So any 2 of those. So you pick the one characteristic you're going to write about, then you pick the 2 works of literature you're going to discuss in relation. So these videos are going over some of those works of literature that we have. And today's is on Frankenstein. So we find Frankenstein in our textbook starting on page 585. And we have a couple of chapters. We have chapter 15, primarily from the perspective of Dr. Victor Frankenstein. And then we have chapter 17, which is primarily from the perspective of the creature, or the monster that was created. In our essay topic, let's see what we have. Frankenstein is letter G. So let's go up here and see which one that relates to. 2, a desire for personal freedom. 3, criticism of society. 5, feeling isolated from society and a desire for solitude. 6, emphasis on one's memory and feelings, not logic and reason. So any of those, you could decide that Frankenstein says something about those different topics. You pick the one, if you want to do Frankenstein, the one that you think most fits how your mind is processing the information. Okay? So let's take a look just at some highlights of Frankenstein here in these chapters. In chapter 15, the monster is recounting the story of finding a cottage and wanting to be friends with the people in the cottage. There's an old blind man there, so he decides he'll approach the old blind man first. And he hopes, of course, that the blind man will like him, introduce him to the family, and the family will accept him. Of course, we know that's not going to happen. But he says, I found in it a never-ending source of speculation and astonishment. But I thought Werther himself a more divine being than I had ever beheld or imagined. His character contained no pretension, but it sank deep. I inclined toward the opinions of the hero, whose extinction I wept. So he's been reading, the monster's been reading, and different things that he's been reading have impressed him. If you notice, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is not the mindless monster that sometimes Hollywood has made him out to be. He's a very thinking individual. I sympathized with and partly understood them, but I was unformed in mind. I was dependent on none and related to none. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. I learned from Werther's imaginations despondency and gloom, but Plutarch taught me high thoughts. He elevated me above the wretched sphere of my own reflections, to admire and love the heroes of past ages. But then he says, on page 587, but Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. I read it, as I had read other volumes which had fallen into my hand, as a true history. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of the omnipotent God warring with his creatures was capable of exacting. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. Many times, he goes on to say, I considered Satan as the fitter emblem for my condition, for often like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy arose among me. Hateful day when I received life, accursed Creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God in pity made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very semblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred. So he feels very, very cut off from society. He says, increase of knowledge only discovered to me more clearly what a wretched outcast I was. I cherished hope, it is true, but it vanished when I beheld my person reflected in water, or my shadow in the moonshine, even as that frail image in that inconstant shade. But it was all a dream. No Eve soothed my sorrows, nor shared my thoughts. I was alone. I remembered Adam's supplication to his Creator, but where was mine? He had abandoned me, and in the bitterness of my heart I cursed him. I resolved many projects, but that on which I finally fixed was to enter the dwelling when the blind old man should be alone. I had sagacity enough to discover that the unnatural hideousness of my person was the chief object of horror with those who had formerly beheld me. My voice, although harsh, had nothing terrible in it. I thought, therefore, that if in the absence of his children I could gain the goodwill and meditation of old De Lacy, I might, by his means, be tolerated by my younger protectors. So he hopes that he could go and make friends with these people. He goes, we read on 590, 591, we learned that he does go, he does meet the old man. The old man does like him, but when he tells the old man that it's his family that the creature really wants to meet and make his own family, the old man doesn't really have time to respond, and the children come in, and of course they're horrified by the monster, and they beat him and drive him away. I am an unfortunate and deserted creature. I look around and have no relation or friend upon the earth. These amiable people to whom I go have never seen me and know little of me. I am full of fears, for if I fail there, I am an outcast in the world forever. And so he really wants the doctor to create a female companion for him, the traditional bride of Frankenstein, as the movies call her. So in chapter 17, he says, you must create a female for me, with whom I can live in the interchange of these sympathies necessary for my being. This you alone can do, and I demand it of you as a right, which you must not refuse to concede. I do refuse, I replied. No torture shall ever extort a consent from me. You may render me the most miserable of men, but you shall never make me base in my own eyes. Shall I create another like yourself, whose joint wickedness might desolate the world? Begone! I've answered you. You may torture me, but I'll never consent. And it's interesting how calm the monster is and how upset Dr. Frankenstein is. And he really appeals to Dr. Frankenstein's heart and logic and says, if you do this for me, we will go away. And I demand that you create this monster just as hideous as I am, so that no one will want her, and only she and I will want one another. And then we will go away somewhere, maybe to South America, and go away from everybody. And then, of course, Dr. Frankenstein says, his words had a strange effect upon me. I compassionated him and sometimes felt the wish to console him, but when I looked upon him, when I saw the filthy mass that moved and talked, my heart sickened, and my feelings were altered to those of horror and hatred. Later on, Dr. Frankenstein does go ahead and begin to create the she-monster, but then destroys his work, and the monster sees that Dr. Frankenstein destroys the work, and of course snaps at that moment and decides, well, if he cannot have a wife, then Dr. Frankenstein cannot have a wife. And the monster goes ahead and murders, of course, Victor's wife as well, fulfilling his role as a true monster. So the feeling isolated from society certainly applies to this particular work in many different ways. I've only read a few lines from there, but that's enough evidence really to give you a good start if you choose to use that work as part of your essay.